They laughed. They pointed the finger. They said it was weak, useless, temporary. But what if I told you that, at the beginning of the 20th century, electric cars were already a reality? That they dominated the streets, long before Tesla, long before Elon Musk? And then, they disappeared, as if they never existed. But why? Today, you'll discover how this technology was sabotaged, ridiculed, and forgotten, and why it's come back with a vengeance to challenge the structures of the modern world. The story they told you. Maybe it's only part of the truth. To understand how it all started, we need to go back in time, exactly to the year 1900. The streets of New York were changing. Horses still roamed avenues full of mud, while electric trams crossed neighborhoods and electricity began to illuminate the city. But something different caught our attention. Silent, smokeless vehicles that glided through the streets without needing gasoline. They were the first electric cars, and they were popular. At the turn of the century, about a third of cars in the United States were electric. Yes, that's right, 1/3. These vehicles were clean, didn't make noise, and didn't require physical effort to run. Unlike gasoline cars, which had to be started with a heavy crank, they were considered advanced, luxurious, and, most curiously, extremely efficient for everyday life. Companies like Detroit Electric manufactured models for the American elite. High society women preferred electric cars. They were easy to drive, stylish, and reliable. Thomas Edison, the electrical genius, bet everything on batteries. It invested heavily in research to develop technologies that would make electric cars even more autonomous. Some models at that time could travel up to 160 kilometers on a single charge, something that, if we think about it, is still comparable to some modern vehicles. So why did they disappear? This is where the story starts to get weird. In 1908, Henry Ford launched the Model T, a gasoline-powered car with mass production and a much more affordable price. It was the beginning of the American automotive revolution, but also the beginning of the end for electric cars. Gasoline was plentiful, cheap, and highly lucrative. Soon, the oil industry began to grow, and along with it, the pressure to push the combustion car as a symbol of freedom and progress also grew. The propaganda was subtle but powerful. Electric cars began to be seen as something for weak, fragile, slow people, while gasoline vehicles were promoted as strong, masculine, fast. Little by little, the trams began to disappear from the streets, from the newspapers, and from history. But what if this wasn't just a coincidence? What if electric cars didn't fail because of technology, but rather because they were silenced by much larger interests? In the next section, you will discover how oil lobbies and large corporations directly influence the end of this silent revolution, and why this movement may be repeating itself now before our eyes. But before we go any further, it's worth asking a simple question. Who profits when cars rely on gasoline? The answer may reveal more than it seems. In the decades following the launch of the Model T, the automotive industry grew like never before. Gas stations appeared on every corner. Oil has become the black gold of the world economy. And the more combustion engines became popular, the more electric cars disappeared from history. After all, why bet on batteries, charging stations, silence, and sustainability if gasoline was generating billions in profit? It was at that moment that the real behind-the-scenes sabotage began. While the public was bombarded with campaigns that extolled the roar of engines, speed, and the freedom of driving long distances, trams began to be painted as fragile, limited, and unnatural. Oil companies invested heavily to maintain absolute dominance of the energy matrix. And it wasn't just marketing. Behind the scenes, patents were purchased and shelved. Promising technologies were stifled. Prototypes of vehicles with more efficient batteries simply disappeared from public records. In the middle of the 20th century, a series of initiatives to revive the electric car were halted without convincing explanations. The automobile industry, increasingly intertwined with the oil industry, did not want to risk disruption. Imagine the impact of a vehicle that didn't need to fill up with gasoline. Imagine millions of consumers stopping visiting gas stations, changing oil, buying parts that wear out due to combustion. The electric car was, and still is, a direct threat to the traditional business model. And this is where the story takes on even darker tones. In the 1990s, General Motors launched the EV1, a modern, futuristic, efficient electric car. It was the first model created from scratch to be 100% electric, with advanced aerodynamics and a nickel battery. The EV1 wasn't an adaptation, it was a promise of real disruption. Those who had the chance to drive an EV1 said the experience was unique. Silent, fast, comfortable, and with excellent urban performance. Customers loved it. The first units were delivered on a leasing basis to customers in California and Arizona. But then, something strange happened. GM stopped promoting the car, refused requests for contract renewal, and worse, collected all the vehicles and destroyed them. Hundreds of perfectly functional electric cars, with growing public acceptance, were crushed in scrapyards, without ever being released for sale. The company claimed that the market was not prepared. But records and documents revealed external pressure from oil corporations and even legal actions against pollutant emissions regulations. The documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car, released in 2006, exposed the behind-the-scenes of this destruction. And he revealed that there were more interests in keeping everything as it was than in changing the world. If even a giant like GM had to back down, who really controls the future of mobility? These episodes are no exception. They are the standard. Whenever electric cars have made a comeback, something or someone has intervened. In the 1970s, amid the oil crisis, the idea resurfaced. New prototypes were tested, magazines publicized their advantages. But soon, everything disappeared from the media. The price of gasoline fell, and the need for change evaporated. In the 90s, it was the EV1. In the 2000s, small startups tried again. Some were purchased, others went bankrupt. The pattern repeated itself. Only with the arrival of Tesla and Elon Musk's bold vision did the game truly begin to change. But has it really changed? Because even today, in the 21st century, with all the technology we have available, electric cars still face obstacles, curiously similar to those of more than 100 years ago. Charging. Infrastructure is still scarce in many countries. The acquisition price remains high. Autonomy remains a concern. And now, a new narrative has gained traction: the environmental impact of battery production. Does it look familiar? Our system always seems to find a new way to resist change, to maintain the status quo. And when we look back, we see a cycle that repeats itself: innovation, resistance, sabotage, oblivion. But something is changing. Large automakers who previously ignored electric cars are now rushing to launch their own models. Century-old brands such as Ford, Volkswagen, GM, and Mercedes have already announced plans to fully or partially electrify their fleets in the coming years. The question is, are they doing this because they believe in technology, or because they fear being swallowed by it? Electric vehicle sales have soared in recent years. Governments began to create goals to ban the sale of gasoline cars. The pressure for sustainable solutions has grown. And at the same time, new questions begin to arise. Where does the energy that powers these cars come from? How are the raw materials for batteries extracted? What happens to them when they lose their useful life? The conspiracy changes shape, but lives on. Today, the electric car is no longer a joke. It's a status symbol. It's a trend. It's revolution. But are we really free from sabotage? Or has it just evolved along with technology? Returning to the original question, why were they ridiculed? Perhaps because, from the beginning, they represented a threat. Not just technological, but economic, cultural, policy. The electric car proposes a new logic: less pollution, less dependence on oil, less maintenance, less consumption. And that, for those who make a living selling the opposite, has always been a problem. If in the past they were buried by hidden interests, now they are returning to the surface with force. But the system is still there, observing, adjusting, and, who knows, preparing the next counterattack. And the big question is, will electric cars win this time? Or will we repeat the mistakes of the past with new clothes and recycled promises? Maybe, after all, this isn't just the story of a car, but the story of how progress has always had to fight to exist. And most importantly, this story is still being written. Today, more than a century after the disappearance of the first electric cars, the technology has returned with a vengeance. But the question remains: will this time be different? From the outside, everything seems to be changing. The streets began to fill with electric Teslas, BYDs, Kias, and even very traditional brands such as Mercedes-Benz and Porsche are investing in battery-powered models. Every month, new promises emerge of greater autonomy, faster charging, futuristic designs, silent engines. But when we look closer, the similarities with the past become frightening. Infrastructure, for example, continues to be a problem. In many countries, charging stations are scarce. Living in an apartment and charging an electric car is still a logistical challenge. Recharging time, despite having improved, still does not compete with the 2 minutes needed to fill a fuel tank. And the electrical grid? Is it prepared for the mass transition? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? At the beginning of the 20th century, electric cars faced barriers in terms of energy distribution, range, and popular acceptance. A century has passed, and the challenges remain surprisingly similar. The difference: now they are camouflaged under a veneer of progress. And this raises an uncomfortable question. Are we truly being guided by a revolution, or by a superficial, carefully controlled replacement? After all, the global power system has not disappeared. He just learned to adapt. Corporations that once derided electric cars are now on the front lines of electrification, but not because they embraced sustainability, but because they realized that not controlling the change would be even more dangerous. This transition, it seems, is being carried out along the same lines as the old industrial logic, the same one that knocked down the trams in the past. Now, however, she dresses in green. It presents itself as environmentally friendly, and he uses the language of the future to maintain the same interests in the present. Meanwhile, consumers are bombarded with advertising about freedom, innovation, and environmental commitment. But we rarely talk about real impacts of lithium mining, about the exploitation of child labor in cobalt-producing regions, or about the fact that, in many countries, the energy used to charge an EV still comes from coal. The image is clean, but the base remains dirty. And the most ironic thing is that electric cars today cost more than the majority of the population can afford. They became synonymous with status, luxury, and exclusivity, when, in essence, they should be an accessible and sustainable solution for everyone. Instead, we have $300,000 electric cars, while millions still don't even have access to decent public transport. It's the old cycle of capital disguised as innovation. Worse, each technological advance seems to be accompanied by a new dependency. Before, it was oil. Now, it's lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, finite elements extracted under precarious conditions, which concentrate even more power in a few hands. None of this is a coincidence. The truth is that the same interests that buried electric cars 100 years ago are now behind their rebirth, but this time controlling the narrative, controlling costs, and above all, controlling who can and cannot be part of the sustainable future. Yes, electric cars are back, but they are no longer a threat to the system. They were incorporated into it. The silent revolution that could have changed the course of global mobility at the beginning of the 20th century became a premium product. And the promise of energy freedom has become just another cog in the same machine. Perhaps this is the big lesson. The problem was never technology. The problem has always been control. And this control changes form over time. Reinvent yourself adapts, and it often convinces even the most attentive that they are part of something new, when in fact they are just running in circles. Today, when we see governments offering subsidies for electric vehicles, it looks like progress. But at the same time, these same governments subsidize billions to the oil industry. It's as if they played on both sides of the match, and guess who keeps winning? The same companies that sabotaged the EV1 now sell luxury electric SUVs. The same automakers that destroyed battery patents are launching green platforms. The same media that ignored the first trams of the 20th century now celebrates each new model as if it were the reinvention of the wheel. It's as if everything has changed, so that everything remains the same. But not all is lost. Today, we have access to information. The story, once forgotten, can now be told, and people are starting to question it. Suspicious, looking for alternatives that are not just dressed in green. Perhaps there is still time to change course, to learn from past mistakes, to regain control of a technology that should serve humanity, and not the profits of a few. Because at the end of the day, electric cars have always been more than a means of transportation. They represent the possibility of a new path, a decentralized energy system, less polluting, more democratic, and if we really want to move forward, we need to look back, for the forgotten engineers, for the ignored inventors, for the wrecked cars, for the ideas that almost changed the world. We need to remember that the future already existed, and he was silenced. But now, he's coming back. And the question that remains is, are we going to allow history to repeat itself? Or, this time, let's do it differently? In the next video, you will learn about the history of EV1, the electric car that promised to change the game in the 90s, but was deliberately erased by the same industry that created it. A vehicle that worked, delighted consumers, and was crushed by General Motors' own hands. If you found this story surprising, wait until you find out what GM did to hundreds of cars, and the real reason behind it. The conspiracy is not over. She just evolved, and you're about to understand who killed the modern electric car. Imagine an electric car launched in the 90s, fully functional, silent, fast, with futuristic design, very low maintenance costs, and approved by users. Now imagine that this car was not a market failure. On the contrary, whoever ran it loved it. People wanted to renew their contracts, keep their vehicles for longer, and recommend them to friends and family. And then, the automaker removed all cars from the streets. He silently collected each unit, ignored customer renewal requests. He refused to sell any copies, and in the end, destroyed everything. Hundreds of electric cars were taken to warehouses in desert regions and crushed by tractors. This story is real. The car was called EV1, and whoever created it was the General Motors. But why would a company do this? To understand this decision, which is so absurd at first glance, we need to go back to 1996. At the time, pressure for alternatives to fossil fuels was beginning to grow. Urban pollution was a constant problem, especially in California. Environmental concerns were gaining strength, and state authorities approved legislation called ZEV Mandate, which forced automakers to offer a minimum percentage of zero-emission vehicles if they wanted to continue selling cars in the state. It was this measure that forced GM to think differently, and that's how the EV won. The project was bold, an electric car designed from scratch. No improvised adaptations to gasoline. E-models. The EV1 had a lightweight aerodynamic body, nickel metal hydride batteries, futuristic design, and surprising speed, 0 to 100 km/h in less than 9 seconds. The initial range was approximately 110 to 160 kilometers, depending on use. And despite the limitations of the time, the driving experience was praised by almost all users. Silent, soft, efficient, technological. But there was one detail. The cars were not sold. They were only offered through leasing, a type of rental with a closed contract. The user could use the car for a while, but did not become the owner. At the time, few people questioned this strategy. It just seemed like a way to test the market. But this test had an already designed end. As the years passed, GM did not expand the production, did not invest in new versions, didn't do marketing, did not train dealerships, and little by little, he began to deactivate contracts, citing low demand. But it was a lie. Consumers themselves told another story. Many of them asked to buy the car at the end of the contract. Some even offered to pay more. GM refused, in all cases, and then the company did something that left the world perplexed. She recalled all EV1s still in circulation, loaded it onto trucks, took it to a junkyard in Arizona, and crushed all the vehicles with hydraulic tractors. One by one, the images circulated on the internet. Owners crying, environmentalists protesting, posters asking, "Let us buy the EV1." But it was no use. GM destroyed virtually all units. The official explanation was weak. The car was not profitable. The market was not ready. Maintenance would be expensive. But the facts show something else. Around the same time, GM lobbied the California government to revoke the requirement for zero-emission vehicles. With support from other automakers and oil industry, managed to push for a change in the law. In other words, as soon as the obligations disappeared, the project was canceled and the cars were destroyed. But why? Why eliminate a technology that worked? What pleases customers? That it had real potential? The answer can be summed up in one word: interests. The electric car was a direct threat to everything that supported the industry's profitability. Without gasoline, there are no fuel sales. Without oil, there are no periodic changes. No combustion engine, less maintenance, less wear, fewer parts to change, fewer services to profit from. And it doesn't stop there. The EV1 also represented a risk for the dealerships themselves, which make high profits from after-sales. And above all, it challenged the oil giants, who make billions in profit from the current model. In other words, it was not enough to stop the project. It was necessary to erase it from history. And that's what GM tried to do. The documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car, released in 2006, delved deeply into the case. It showed behind-the-scenes political pressure, hidden lobbies and testimonies from frustrated users, outraged experts, and even engineers who worked on the project. The verdict: the EV1 didn't fail. He was eliminated. The official story said the market rejected it, but the facts show that the market never had a real chance to decide. It was sabotage, a planned destruction. And once again, the trams were buried alive. But this time, the funeral was filmed, registered, exposed, and perhaps that's why Tesla's return years later was so different. Elon Musk has learned from past mistakes, created its own distribution network, built its own charging infrastructure. He controlled every step of the process and refused to depend on third parties. Tesla did not ask for permission. It just did. And that is precisely why it has become so threatening to the system. But even with all this progress, the ghost of the EV1 still haunts the industry and leaves a clear lesson. When progress threatens profits, he becomes a target. What happened with the EV1 was not a mistake. It was a choice. And that choice cost the world decades of delay. If that car had been taken forward, if it had been adopted on a large scale, would we be living in a completely different reality today? Less polluted? Less dependent on oil? Freer? This question will never be answered. But we have to learn from it, because history can even repeat itself. But now, we have closer eyes, louder voices, and information that can no longer be hidden so easily. EV1 died, but the idea survived. And now it's up to us to decide. Are we going to allow sabotage to continue, or will we tell these stories so they are never forgotten? In the next video, we will travel even deeper into the past to understand how the first trams of the 19th century already faced the same enemies, and how, from the beginning, the system has always made a point of silencing what could change everything. Because if Tesla wasn't the first, who was? And why doesn't anyone talk about it?